Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time, not to a grand castle or a bustling Roman city, but to a place far quieter, far simpler, and infinitely colder. We're heading to the American frontier, sometime in the mid-19th century, to spend a winter night in a one-room log cabin. We're going to dismantle that cozy, romantic image of Little House on the Prairie, and get real about why trying to sleep through a pioneer winter, well, it pretty much sucked. Frankly, wrapped up in your modern duvet, you probably wouldn't survive the first few hours. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where our little community gathers from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the light. It's failing. Out here, with no city glow to stain the horizon. The end of the day is an absolute, final thing. The sun doesn't set, it abandons you. One moment, the low, watery winter sun is casting long, blue shadows across the snow. The next, it has slipped below the jagged line of distant, skeletal trees, and all warmth is gone from the world. It's a physical sensation, like a blanket being yanked away. The temperature, already hovering near freezing, begins its steady, nightly plummet. Your day is done. From dawn until this moment, you've been working. Today's final task was splitting wood, and your body hums with the phantom vibration of the axe handle. Your shoulders ache with a deep, satisfying burn, but your fingers are not. Clumsy things you can barely feel inside your thin leather gloves. You hoist the last load of wood, a precious bundle of energy and life, into the crook of your arm. It's heavy, and the rough bark digs into your coat. You turn your back to the darkening woods and face your home. It's not much. A squat, dark rectangle against the vast, empty canvas of snow. There's no romance in it. Not right now. It's a box you built to keep the wilderness from killing you in your sleep. Most of these cabins were thrown up in a hurry. A well-known historical practice was the cabin raising, a community event where neighbors would gather to help a new family erect the basic log structure, often in a single day. It was a marvel of cooperation, but speed and precision rarely go hand in hand. The logs were cut, notched, and stacked, but they weren't ever perfect. As you trudge through the snow, each step makes a sharp, squeaking crunch. It's the sound of true cold. The air itself feels thin and sharp in your lungs, each breath a tiny, sharp. A wind begins to pick up, not a howling gale, but a persistent, searching wind. It's a hunter. It slithers across the frozen field, finding the smallest gaps in your worn wool coat, the space between your collar and your neck. It whispers promises of the night to come. This is the part of the day where the silence can get to you. It's a profound quiet that modern life has all but erased. There are no cars, no distant sirens, no hum of electricity. There's only the sigh of the wind and the groan of ancient trees shifting under the immense pressure of the cold. It's a weird, and frankly, unsettling phenomenon that many who lived in these conditions reported. The intense cold seemed to change the very nature of sound. Some swore that on the coldest nights, noises seemed louder, clearer. Traveling farther than they should, a snapping twig in the forest could sound as if it were right outside your wall. Standing here for a moment, catching your breath, you look out at the endless expanse of white and gray. The isolation is total. Historians and psychologists still debate the full impact of this profound solitude, sometimes called prairie madness. They question whether it was a definable clinical condition or simply the understandable, crushing weight of loneliness and hardship on the human psyche. Was the deep melancholy that settled over so many frontier families in the winter a sickness? Or was it a perfectly rational response to living in a small, dark box in the middle of a vast, frozen, and indifferent landscape? But you don't have time for such thoughts. The cold is a physical enemy, and it's advancing. The last vestiges of grey light are fading, and the world is dissolving into shades of black. Your only goal is to get inside. You can see the dark shape of the door, a clumsy plank of wood with a leather hinge. There is no welcoming porch light, no warm glow from a window. There is only the promise of 4 walls. You shift the weight of the firewood in your arm, reach out with a numb hand, and grasp the cold, rough wood of the door latch. The latch is stiff and resists your pull. Small, final act of defiance from the cold. With a grunt, you put your shoulder into the door and it scrapes open with a low groan. The sound of wood complaining against wood. You stumble inside, into a darkness that is somehow heavier and more complete than the twilight you just left. The wind you were fighting is cut off, but the silence that replaces it is thick and close. You kick the door shut behind you, and the sound echoes with a dead finality in the small space. Welcome home. For a moment, you just stand there, letting your eyes adjust. The firewood in your arm feels impossibly heavy. The room is not warm. Let's be very clear about that. It is brutally cold. Just a few degrees less so than the air outside. The cabin offers not warmth, but merely a reprieve from the wind. It's a subtle but important distinction. The air inside is still, stagnant, and carries the faint, layered scent of wood smoke, old sweat, and something vaguely earthy, like a damp cellar. As your vision slowly swims into focus, you see the outlines of your entire world contained within these 4 walls. This isn't a house with rooms, it's a room that pretends to be a house. It is your kitchen, your dining room, your living room, and your bedroom. Over in one corner, a rough-hewn table holds a few pewter plates and a wooden bucket. That's the kitchen. Next to it, a couple of 3-legged stools are tilted against the wall. That's your dining and living area. The rest of the floor space is dominated by the bed, a low frame piled with straw and covered with animal pelts, and the massive stone hearth that occupies much of the far wall. Every single possession you own is in this room, either hanging from pegs on the wall or tucked into corners. There's a tangible sense of claustrophobia, a feeling that the walls are slowly, patiently closing in. You take a step forward, and your boots meet the floor not with a thud, but with a soft, solid crunch. The floor isn't wood. Planks were a luxury, requiring a sawmill or immense amounts of time and labor with a pit saw. Your floor is packed earth, beaten down until it's nearly as hard as stone. It's a simple, effective solution, but it's also a direct conduit for the planet's deep, unyielding cold. The frost line is only a few feet below you, and this floor radiates a constant, gentle chill that will seep into the soles of your feet, into your bones. All night long, your eyes are drawn to the single source of outside light, a small, square opening in the wall. It's not a window, not in any modern sense. Glass was prohibitively expensive and a nightmare to transport over rough terrain. Instead, what you have is a piece of greased paper. This was a common, if rather pathetic, solution on the frontier. You take a heavy sheet of paper or a piece of scraped animal membrane and soak it in animal fat or lard. It made the paper translucent, allowing a murky, depressing grey light to filter through during the day, but it did almost nothing to insulate. It was flimsy, easily torn by the wind, and on a night like this, the cold simply passes through it as if it weren't there. You can see the paper rippling slightly now, even with the door shut, the sign that the wind is finding its way through the chinks in the logs. The whole concept of privacy as we know it is a historical invention, and in this room, it simply doesn't exist. This is a point that historians and sociologists continue to explore. How did living in such intensely close quarters shape the frontier family and the individual? We have diaries filled with accounts of daily chores and weather, but they rarely speak to the quiet desperation of having no personal space. Did this constant, unavoidable togetherness forge an unbreakable family bond, a unit perfectly honed for survival, or did it create unspoken resentments, a deep, internal world where people retreated because they could not retreat physically? The historical record is mostly silent on these internal struggles. leading us to debate the true psychological cost of having your every breath, every sigh, every restless turn in your sleep witnessed by your entire family, night after night. You cross the cold, earthen shore, your boots making soft sounds. The air is so frigid you can almost taste it. The weight of the firewood is no longer just an ache, it's a promise. It's the only thing that stands between you and a night of shivering misery. You move toward the great stone hearth, a black, gaping mouth in the wall. This is the heart of the cabin. In a few moments, it will be the only source of light and life in this small, cold box. The single point of focus for the long, dark hours ahead. You kneel down on the frozen ground, carefully setting the logs beside the hearth, your numb fingers fumbling as you do. The real work of the night is about to begin. Kneeling on the cold earth, you peer into the deep, dark cavity of the fireplace. The stones are frigid to the touch, still radiating the memory of last night's chill. This hearth is the cabin's most critical feature, its temperamental god. It is both your savior and a constant, low-grade threat. Building it was an art form. The stones had to be chosen carefully, mortared with a mixture of clay and grass to hold them together. A poorly constructed fireplace could fill the room with smoke or, even worse, set the entire cabin ablaze, a terrifyingly common fate on the frontier. Your first task is to find the embers, a flicker of hope. You carefully sift through the grey and white ash from this morning's fire. Getting a fire going from scratch with flint and steel is a miserable, finger-numbing process that you'd rather avoid. You're in luck. Deep within the pile of ash, a few tiny, precious embers are still faintly glowing, a barely perceptible orange in the gloom. You blow on them gently, a soft, steady breath. The tiny sparks brighten, winking back at you. It's a small victory, but out here, you take every victory you can get. You carefully add a nest of dried tinder, a handful of shredded bark and wood shavings you keep in a small box by the hearth. You blow again, more insistently this time. The tinder begins to smoke, a thin, acrid ribbon spiraling up the chimney. A tiny flame sputters, wavers, and then, with a soft whoosh, it catches. The flame is small and fragile, but it's alive. You feed it with small twigs, then slightly larger kindling, nurturing it with the care of a surgeon, slowly, painstakingly. You build the fire up until the flames are licking at the first of the larger knobs you brought in. The fire grows, and with it, a circle of light pushes back the oppressive darkness. The damp, musty smell of the room is slowly being overpowered by the clean, sharp scent of burning pine. The shadows dance and leap up the rough log walls, making the small space feel both alive and vaguely menacing. This is the moment where the cozy image of cabin life comes from, the part everyone romanticizes. The fire crackles and pops, a cheerful, reassuring sound. The light is warm and golden. It feels like a triumph against the vast, cold emptiness outside. But it's a lie, a beautiful, comforting lie. The fireplace is a paradox of physics. It gives, but it also takes. As the fire roars to life, it begins to suck the air out of the cabin, pulling it up the chimney. This creates a vacuum effect, and the cabin, in its desperate attempt to equalize the pressure, begins to actively draw in cold air from the outside. Every tiny crack, every gap, every poorly sealed spot now becomes an open invitation for the winter wind. You are, in effect, heating the immediate area in front of the fire by making the rest of the room even colder. You can feel it happening, while the front of your body begins to toast in the radiant heat. Your back remains chilled. You can feel the cold air moving, a slow, steady river flowing across the earthen floor, drawn from the walls toward the hungry mouth of the hearth. You are sitting at the confluence of two extremes. This intense temperature differential was a constant source of complaint in pioneer diaries and letters. People would write about having to turn themselves constantly, like a rotisserie chicken, to keep from freezing on one side while scorching on the other. Here's a bizarre little detail that modern comfort has erased from our collective memory: the chimney itself. Most frontier chimneys weren't the sturdy brick, or stone structures we imagine. Many were built using a wattle and daub method. This involved weaving a lattice of sticks and cane the wattle and then plastering it, inside and out, with a thick layer of clay mixed with grass or animal hair the daub. It was a fire hazard waiting to happen. The clay would dry, crack, and sometimes fall off, exposing the flammable wooden lattice beneath to the intense heat. Historical accounts are full of stories of people having to frantically dash outside and throw snow on their own chimney to keep it from catching fire. The very thing meant to keep you warm could, at any moment, burn your house down. Historians are still piecing together the minutiae of daily domestic life, especially how people manage these inefficient heating systems. There's a debate about how much wood was actually burned. Did they keep a massive, roaring fire all night, requiring a huge stockpile of wood and constant tending, or did they let it die down to embers, conserving fuel but plunging the room into near freezing temperatures by morning? The answer likely varies based on the region, the severity of the winter, and the family's resources. But both options presented a grim trade-off: a night of constant work, or a night of profound cold. There was no third, comfortable choice. For now, you bask in the fire's temporary generosity. The light flickers across the rough, axe-hewn surfaces of the logs that make up your walls. The flames are a hypnotic, dancing spectacle. It's easy, in this moment, to forget the cold at your back. It's easy to feel a sense of security, of having created a small bubble of warmth and life against the encroaching night. But the night is long, and the fire is hungry. Its promises are always conditional. As your eyes adjust to the flickering firelight, you start to see the walls properly for the first time tonight, not as a solid barrier, but as a collection of individual logs, stacked one on top of the other. They are massive, thick, and reassuringly solid. When you built this cabin, each one was a victory, hewn from the forest with nothing but an axe and a saw. They feel like a fortress. But now, in the dancing light, you notice the gaps. Between each log is a line of chinking. This is the crucial, and often failing, insulation of your home. The process was simple. You de-stuff the gaps between the logs with whatever you could find. Sometimes it was moss, sometimes dried grass, sometimes twisted ropes of horsehair. Then, you de-smear a thick layer of clay or mud over it, both inside and out, to create a seal. It was a messy, laborious job, and it was never, ever perfect. As you sit there, you can actually see the flaws. In one spot, near the floor, a chunk of the dried mud has crumbled away, leaving a dark, gaping hole a few inches long. You can't see the wind, but you can see its effect. The flame of a nearby candle, which you've just lit, flickers erratically, dancing in a draft that shouldn't exist. You get up, walk over, and press your hand against the wall. The log itself is cold, but the air flowing through that tiny gap is a lance of pure, Arctic ice. It's a direct, unfiltered injection of the outside world. You look around the room. The firelight reveals a dozen other similar betrayals. Pale long, thin crack runs vertically where the daubing has shrunk away from the wood. A patch of moss near the ceiling looks loose, disturbed. Each of these is a tiny leak, a pinhole in your defense. Individually, they are insignificant, but together, they create a sieve. The cabin doesn't just have one draft, it has 100. A symphony of them, all working in concert to steal your precious, hard-won heat. This is why your back is so cold. The warm air from the fireplace rises, creating a gentle pressure high in the room. This pushes air out of the higher cracks. Meanwhile, the fire is drawing air in from the lower cracks. This creates a slow, constant, circular airflow within the cabin. Warm air moves out the top, cold air moves in at the bottom. The entire room is a horribly inefficient convection engine, and you are sitting right in the middle of it. Now for a truly strange detail about this chinking. What you used to make it was incredibly important, and sometimes a little gross. While clay and mud were common, a prized ingredient for making the daub stickier and more durable was manure. Animal dung, mixed with clay and straw, created a sort of primitive, fibrous cement that held together surprisingly well. So the very walls that are supposed to be protecting you from the elements are, in some cases, literally held together with poo. It's a humbling thought. The barrier between you and the blizzard might just be a smear of mud and cow dung. You spend a few minutes trying to patch the worst of the holes. You grab a handful of spare moss from a sack in the corner and cram it into the gap near the floor. You use your fingers to push some loose clay back into another crack. It's a futile, endless task, like trying to bail out a sinking boat with a thimble. As soon as you patch one hole, you feel a new draft on the back of your neck. The cold is relentless. It will always find a way in. Historians who study vernacular architecture, the architecture of ordinary people, are fascinated by Chin King. The methods and materials vary dramatically by region, depending on the local climate and available resources. In the warmer, richer south, settlers might use a clay-heavy mix to repel rain. In the brutally cold north, they might focus on thicker insulation, packing the gaps with anything they could find. There's an ongoing academic discussion about just how effective these methods really were. Some argue that a well-chink cabin could be reasonably comfortable, a testament to pioneer ingenuity. Others, citing primary source accounts of constant drafts and indoor frost, argue that the battle was largely a losing one, and that the cozy cabin is a myth built on survivorship bias. We hear from those who made it through the winter, not those who succumb to the constant, draining cold. You give up on your repairs for now. It's getting late. You stand in the center of the room and listen. And now that you're paying attention, you can hear it. It's not just the pop of the fire or the groan of the house settling. It's a low, almost inaudible whistle. It's the sound of the wind, tomatized into 100 tiny streams, squeezing its way through the walls. It's the whisper of the wilderness, reminding you that these walls are not as solid as they seem. They are porous, a membrane between you and the night is seeping in. The battle for warmth isn't just about the fire you're adding, it's about the cold that's constantly, silently, invading your space from every direction. With the drafts temporarily, and inadequately, addressed, your attention turns to your stomach. It's been hours since your midday meal of cold jerky and hard bread, and a familiar, gnawing hunger is making itself known. It's time for dinner. But dinner in this cabin is not a relaxing affair, it's a logistical challenge dictated by the tyranny of the fireplace. You pull one of the three-legged stools closer to the hearth. These stools are a classic example of frontier furniture, functional, unstable, and deeply uncomfortable. 3 legs were better than 4 because on an uneven earthen floor, a 3-legged stool will never wobble. A small mercy. You sit down, so close to the fire that the heat is almost painful on your shins. You can feel the skin on your face tightening. Dinner tonight is simplest if that's been simmering in a heavy, black iron pot hanging over the fire all afternoon. Use a long wooden ladle to scoop some into a pewter bowl. The stew is practical. It's made of whatever was available. Some salted pork for flavor and fat. A few wrinkled potatoes from the root cellar. Maybe a handful of dried beans. It's hot. And it's filling. That's all you can ask for. You hold the bowl in your lap. The heat a welcome blessing for your cold hands. You take your first spoonful. The stew is scalding hot. A molten core of sustenance. But as you eat, you become acutely aware of the fireplace paradox in its most immediate form. The front of your body, from your face down to your knees, is being blasted with intense, radiant heat. You're starting to sweat. Your flannel shirt feels damp against your chest. If you had a thermometer, it might read 90 degrees Fahrenheit, about 32 Celsius on the side of you facing the fire. But your back, turned away from the flames, is living in an entirely different climate. The cold air being drawn across the floor is swirling around you, stealing your body heat. That side of you might be experiencing temperatures closer to 40 degrees about for Celsius. You are a walking weather map, a collision of 2 extreme fronts. You can feel the sweat on your chest and forehead, while at the same time, a deep, Persistent chill was creeping up your spine. This bizarre, bifurcated existence was the norm. People didn't have the language of thermodynamics to describe it, but their letters and diaries are full of complaints about this very thing. They wrote of roasting unfreezing at the same time, of developing coughs and fevers from the constant, dramatic temperature swings their bodies endured every single evening. To combat this, you do what everyone did: you turn. After a few minutes of eating, you physically stand up, turn your body 180 degrees, and sit back down. Now your back gets to roast while the front of you, holding the cooling bowl of stew, begins to feel the creeping chill. This constant rotation was part of the nightly ritual. It was an awkward, restless dance with the fire. Here's a peculiar little side effect of this cooking method: everything tasted like smoke. The open hearth was not a sealed, efficient wood stove. Smoke was a constant companion. A good portion of it went up the chimney, but a significant amount would billow out into the room, especially when a gust of wind came down the flue. This smoke would curl around the cooking pot, infusing the food with a permanent, unavoidable savor of wood smoke. For the first few weeks, it might seem rustic and charming. After months of it, every meal from your morning porridge to your evenings stew tasted vaguely of the fireplace. It was a flavor you could never escape. You finish your meal, your body now thoroughly confused about what temperature it's supposed to be. You set the empty bowl aside. The fire is burning beautifully, a roaring blaze of orange and yellow. It's mesmerizing, but as you stare into it, you notice something else. The back wall of the fireplace, built from carefully chosen firestones, is glowing with a faint, deep red. It has absorbed a tremendous amount of heat. This stone wall is now a massive heat sink, radiating warmth back into the room. This was an intentional design, a primitive form of thermal mass heating. But how effective was it? Really, this is a topic of some debate among experimental archaeologists who have tried to reconstruct and live in these cabins. But on one hand, the heated stone would continue to radiate a gentle warmth long after the fire died down, theoretically helping to moderate the temperature through the night. On the other hand, a huge amount of that heat was simply lost to the outside, as the back of the chimney was, of course, exposed to the elements. Did the thermal mass of the hearth provide a significant, lasting benefit, or was its effect mostly psychological? A comforting glow that promised more warmth than it actually delivered. The consensus seems to be that it helped, but not enough to make the cabin really warm by morning. You scooch your stool back a foot, trying to find a mythical spot where you are neither cooking nor freezing. It doesn't exist. You resign yourself to the reality of the situation. The brief comfort of a hot meal is over. Now, the long, cold wait for bedtime begins. Use it, turning occasionally, a human planet rotating in the orbit of its sun, forever keeping one side in the light and one in the frozen dark. The fire begins to settle into a steady, rhythmic burn, and the evening stretches out before you. There's no television, no books to read by easy light. Candles were precious and used sparingly. The close, fine work of reading by a flickering, unreliable fire was a recipe for a headache. So what do? You work. The day's labor might be over, but the evening's tasks are just beginning. Tonight's job is mending a leather strap from a horse's harness. You retrieve it, along with an AWL and some waxed thread, from a wooden chest. You pull your stool back to the edge of the fire's light, find the spot where the leather is torn, and begin the slow, methodical process of stitching it back together. Your fingers, still stiff from the cold, fumble with the needle. This is the reality of the evening hours, not quiet contemplation, but quiet industry. Every spare moment was filled with small acts of maintenance and preparation. Mending clothes, sharpening a knife, carving a new handle for a tool, shunning beams, carding wool. The list was endless. Survival was a war of attrition, and these small tasks were the daily battles you had to win to keep from falling behind. As you work, your mind turns to where you'll be sleeping in a few hours. You glance over into the dimmest corner of the cabin. away from the direct heat of the fire. There it is, your bed. Calling it a bed is generous. It's a low wooden frame, hastily built from rust-sawn lumber or even just logs, filled with a mattress. And what a mattress it is. It's a large sack, usually made of coarse linen or canvas, stuffed with whatever you could find. If you were lucky, it was filled with straw from the last harvest. The straw provided a decent amount of cushioning and insulation from the cold floor, but straw breaks down. Over time, it gets crushed into a flat, lumpy, dusty mat. Every few months, you'd have to empty the whole thing out, get fresh straw, and re-stuff it. If you didn't have straw, you'd use what nature provided: dried leaves, cattle fluff, corn husks, even pine needles. Each came with its own unique texture, smell, and population of tiny, unseen insects. This lumpy sack sits directly on the wooden frame, which itself might be raised only a few inches off the cold, hard earth. The idea of a box spring or a modern mattress, designed for comfort and support, would be completely alien. The purpose of this bed was singular: to elevate you just enough from the frozen ground to keep the earth from sucking all the heat from your body while you slept. It was a functional piece of survival equipment, not a place of rest and rejuvenation. Here's a small, itchy detail about these mattresses: bed bugs. While we often associate them with modern travel or unclean city apartments, bed bugs have been humanity's constant companions for centuries. They thrived in the cracks of wooden bed frames and in the seams of straw-filled mattresses. For a pioneer family, an infestation was almost impossible to eradicate. They didn't have chemical insecticides. Their best hope was to periodically drag the mattress and the bed frame outside on a bitterly cold day, and let the freezing temperatures kill as many of the pests as they could. It was a temporary solution at best. The thought of settling down for the night on a lumpy, rustling mattress that might also be teeming with tiny, biting roommates is, to put it mildly, not conducive to a good night's sleep. The very concept of a dedicated bedroom was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. In a single-room cabin, the bed was a public piece of furniture. It was where children were born, where the sick ended too, and where the elderly often passed away. It was a central stage for the most intimate and vulnerable moments of life, all played out in the main living space. Historians who study the history of domestic life and privacy often point to the single-room cabin as a stark example of a time before our modern sensibilities about personal space had formed. How did this lack of privacy affect marital relationships or a child's sense of self? It's a question that's difficult to answer definitively. We can only speculate that people developed a different kind of internal boundary, a psychological privacy that we, in our multi-room homes, may no longer need or understand. Did they simply learn to not see things, to tune out the constant presence of others? It's a fascinating, and largely unresolved, debate about the human capacity for adaptation. You finish your mending, the tough leather now securely stitched. You wrap the thread back around its spool and put your tools away. The fire is still burning steadily, but the log on top is beginning to char and shrink. The air in the cabin feels a little cooler than it did an hour ago. The long night is closing in. You look at the lumpy sack in the corner. It doesn't look inviting. It looks like a challenge. You stretch your aching back. The day's labor and the evening's chill settling deep into your muscles. It's almost time to face it. The time has finally come. The mending is done. The last of the stew has been scraped from the pot and eaten. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion has settled over you, heavier than any blanket. It's time to sleep, but you can't just slip under the covers. Preparing for bed on a winter night in this cabin is a strategic operation, a ritual of layering and insulation. Your first move is to stoke the fire one last time. You add the largest, densest log you have, pushing it to the back of the hearth. This is your backlog. The goal isn't to create a roaring blaze, but a slow, smoldering burn that will, with any luck, last until morning, leaving you with enough embers to restart the fire easily. You bank the coals around it, creating a mound of heat that will slowly release its energy over the next several hours. The light in the cabin dims dramatically, plunging the corners into near total darkness. Now, you turn to your sleeping clothes. You don't have pajamas. You sleep in your clothes. To strip down to bare skin in this cold would be madness. At best. You might remove your muddy boots and your heavy outer coat. You'll likely keep your wool trousers, your flannel shirt, and even your thick socks on. This was a common practice. Many pioneers simply slept in the same long underwear they'd been wearing all day, and possibly all week. Laundry was an enormous chore, especially in winter when water had to be hauled and heated over the fire, and drying anything was a multi-day affair. So, you wore your clothes until they could practically stand up on their own. Next comes the bedding. You approach the lumpy straw mattress and begin to assemble your nest. There are no clean, fresh-smelling cotton sheets. Your first layer is likely a rough, scratchy wool blanket. Wool was the miracle fabric of the era. Unlike cotton, it insulates even when it's damp, which is a crucial feature in a cabin where condensation and drifting snow are a constant reality. But one blanket is not nearly enough. You begin to pile on anything and everything that can trap air and provide insulation. The first layer is the most important, the animal pelts. A heavy buckskin, if you were lucky or a skilled hunter, was the ultimate prize. Its thick fur and tough hide created a formidable barrier against the cold seeping up from below. You might also have several deer hides. Their hair shorter but the leather still effective. You arrange these on top of the wool blanket, creating a heavy, animal-scented cocoon. On top of the pelts, you add more blankets. These are probably crazy quilts. Patched together from any scrap of fabric you could find, old clothes, bits of canvas, feed sacks. Every piece of material was too valuable to throw away. The result is a heavy, lumpy, and aesthetically chaotic bedspread. Finally, you might throw your own heavy winter coat on top as a final layer. You were not so much getting into bed as you were burying yourself under a mound of heavy, disparate materials. They truly strange, and frankly smelly. Trick for extra warmth was the bedstone. Throughout the evening, you would have kept a flattish, smooth stone sitting by the hearth, absorbing heat from the fire. Now, you take a piece of cloth, wrap the hot stone in it so it doesn't scorch your blankets or your skin, and quickly slide it deep into the foot of your bed. It's a primitive hot water bottle, a small pocket of concentrated warmth that will slowly fade over the next hour, but it might just be enough to help you fall asleep before the deep cold sets in. Historians who examine pioneer inventories and estate records get a fascinating glimpse into what people considered valuable. While we might expect a seal and/or tools listed as the most important assets, bedding often ranks surprisingly high. A good feather mattress a rare luxury. A thick wool blanket, or a prime bearskin were precious heirlooms, passed down through generations. Their value was not sentimental, it was practical. Good bedding could literally be the difference between life and death during a harsh winter. There's an ongoing debate about the health implications of this bedding. Was sleeping under the immense weight of these heavy, often unwashed layers actually good for you? Some medical historians suggest that while it provided warmth, it also created a perfect environment for lice, fleas, and bacteria, potentially contributing to the skin ailments and respiratory illnesses that were common at the time. You are finally ready. You crawl into the narrow space you've created, pulling the layers up to your chin. The sheer weight of the blankets and pelts is surprising. It's not a comforting weight, it's oppressive, almost claustrophobic. The air trapped inside your nest is already beginning to warm with your body heat, but the tip of your nose, exposed to the room, is icy cold. The lumpy straw mattress conforms to your body in all the wrong ways. You can feel a corn husk poking you in the back. The whole cocoon smells faintly of wood smoke, old wool, damp fur, and dust. This is your haven for the night. You lie still, listening to the fire pop and hiss as it slowly dies down, and you wait for sleep to come. You lie perfectly still beneath the mountain of covers. The initial, small pocket of warmth generated by your body and the heated stone at your feet is your only comfort. Outside this cocoon, the cabin's temperature is already in a free fall. The great, roaring fire is gone, replaced by the deep, ruddy glow of the backlog and its bed of embers. It's a beautiful sight, hypnotic and serene, but it's producing a fraction of the heat it did an hour ago. The immediate effect is a change in the room's acoustics. The cheerful crackle and pop of the blaze are gone. The dominant sound now is a low, almost sub-audible hiss from the smoldering log. This quieting of the fire allows the other, more subtle sounds of the night to come forward. You can hear the wind more clearly now, a low, mournful moan as it presses against the north wall of the cabin. The house itself seems to be groaning under the strain of the immense cold. The logs contracting with sharp, percussive cracks that sound like a footstep on the floor. This is the moment when the true cold begins its assault. As the fire's influence wanes, the laws of thermodynamics take over with brutal efficiency. Heat moves from hot to cold, and you are the hottest thing in this room. The cold doesn't just surround you, it actively tries to drain the warmth from your body. The heavy layers of bedding slow this process, but they cannot stop it. You can feel the chill starting to creep in at the edges of your nest. The air on your face is no longer just cool, it's sharp and biting. The great fireplace, your former savior, now becomes a liability. The chimney, which so effectively vented smoke, is now an open highway to the sky. It's essentially a giant hole in your roof, the warm air inside your cabin. What little of it there is lighter than the cold air outside. So, it rises. It flows silently up the chimney and out into the night, lost forever. A small, steady, invisible river of your precious heat is escaping. To combat this, some pioneers used a chimney board or a damp blanket to block off the fireplace opening after the fire had died down to embers. This was a risky maneuver, if you did it too soon, when there was still significant combustion. You could fill the unventilated cabin with deadly carbon monoxide. If you waited too long, most of the residual heat from the hearth sinus would have already been lost up the flue. It was a dangerous guessing game. Tonight, you've chosen the safer route, you've left it open. Accepting the heat loss is the price for not waking up dead. Here's a bizarre and counterintuitive fact about letting the fire die down: it could cause a smoke bath. As the chimney cooled, the column of rising hot air that normally carried the smoke away would weaken and collapse. If a sudden gust of wind blew across the top of the chimney in just the right way, it could push a plume of cold, smoky air back down into the cabin. You might be jolted from a light sleep by a sudden, choking cloud of acrid smoke, your eyes watering, your lungs gasping in the dark. The historical debate around nighttime fire management is surprisingly intense. Using diaries, letters, and the archaeological remains of hearths, historians try to reconstruct the nightly routine. Did a family member have to wake up every few hours to tend the fire? This seems incredibly disruptive to sleep. Or did they, as we are doing tonight, use the backlog method and simply endure the cold? The evidence suggests that the latter was far more common. People accepted a night of deep cold as a simple fact of life. The goal wasn't to stay warm, but to lose heat slowly enough that you could survive until morning. This acceptance of cold is a mindset so alien to our centrally heated lives that it's difficult to fully grasp. We see a cold room as a problem to be fixed. They saw it as the default state of the world in winter. You shift slightly under the weight of the pelts, trying to find a more comfortable position on the lumpy mattress. The movement allows a pocket of icy air to sneak in around your shoulders. You freeze, pulling the covers tighter, trying to recapture the warmth you just lost. The darkness in the cabin is almost absolute now. The embers provide a faint, demonic glow, just enough to make out the dark shapes of the room, but not enough to truly see. Your world has shrunk to the space you occupy, a small island of fading warmth in an ocean of cold. The night has only just begun. You're hovering in that strange state between wakefulness and sleep. Your body too cold to fully relax. Your mind tired to stay alert. The groans of the cabin and the sigh of the wind have become a hypnotic, monotonous lullaby. Your just about to drift off when a sudden, violent noise shatters the quiet. It's a loud bang against the wall, followed by the shriek of wind finding a new, larger opening. You are instantly wide awake, your heart pounding in your chest. That wasn't the sound of a settling log. That was the sound of something breaking. A powerful gust of wind has struck the west-facing wall of the cabin. The constant, punishing pressure found a weak spot. A large chunk of the clay and mud dough being made brittle by the extreme cold has dislodged and fallen away from between two of the main logs. What was a tiny, whistling crack is now a gaping hole, several inches wide and a foot long. The effect is immediate and disastrous. A torrent of icy air pours into the cabin, a focused, malevolent stream of cold. It's not a gentle draft, it's an invasion. It hits the opposite wall and disperses, creating turbulent eddies of frigid air that swirl through the small space. The delicate thermal balance you had achieved is shattered. The temperature inside the cabin, which had been slowly dropping, now plummets. You can see it, even in the dim glow from the embers. The new draft catches the smoke still trickling from the back log and whips it around the room. More alarmingly, the embers themselves glow brighter for a moment, fanned by the sudden influx of oxygen. A few tiny sparks detach and dance perilously close to the dry wooden floor. You watch them, holding your breath, until they wink out. The fear of fire is second only to the fear of freezing. You know you can't ignore this. Leaving the hole open all night would be catastrophic. It would bleed the cabin of all its warmth, making the morning dangerously cold. With a groan, you make the painful decision to get out of your warm nest. Throwing back the heavy layers feels like jumping into an icy lake. The air hits your skin, and it's a physical shock. The temperature in the room has dropped so significantly in just a few moments that it feels like you've stepped outside. Shivering violently, you swing your legs off the bed and your feet hit the freezing earthen floor. The shock of the cold travels straight up your spine. You don't have many options for a repair. You can't mix up new clay in the middle of the night. You stumble over to the corner where you keep your just-in-case supplies. Your best bet is a spare grain sack. It's coarse, burlap-like material, not a great insulator. But it's better than nothing. You also grab a few old rags. In the near darkness, you make your way to the breach. You can feel the wind pouring through it. A steady, powerful stream. It's like standing in front of an open window. You begin to stuff the hole. First, you jam the rags in as tightly as you can, trying to fill the deepest part of the cavity. Your fingers are already becoming numb and clumsy. Then, you fold the grain sack and wedge it into the remaining space, using a small piece of wood to shove it in as tightly as possible. This particular event highlights a little-known aspect of pioneer life. The cabin was not a static structure but a living, breathing thing that required constant vigilance. It was less like a modern house and more like a ship at sea, constantly being battered by the elements and requiring immediate repairs to stay afloat. This is a detail often overlooked. The romantic image is of a solid, unchanging fortress. The reality was a fragile shelter in a state of continuous, slow-motion decay, especially during the harsh winter months. The question of how pioneers dealt with these catastrophic failures in the middle of the night is a subject of some historical speculation, as it's not the kind of thing people often wrote about in their formal letters. They wrote about the harvest, about births and deaths, but rarely about the frantic, middle-of-the-night scramble to plug a hole in the wall. Historians infer these events from broader descriptions of hardship and the archaeological evidence of repeated repairs on surviving cabins. Was it a common occurrence? Did people have established procedures for it? The academic consensus is that minor failures were constant, nagging part of winter life, and families had to be resourceful and quick-thinking to manage them. The line between a minor inconvenience and a genuine emergency was terrifyingly thin. Your patch is crude, but it works. The torrent of wind is reduced to a manageable seep. It's not perfect, but it will have to do until morning. Shivering uncontrollably, you scramble back to your bed, your teeth chattering. You dive back under the pillows and blankets, but the sanctuary is gone. Your body heat has dissipated, and the bed itself feels cold. You pull the covers over your head, breathing into the small space to create a pocket of warm, humid air. It will be a long time before you feel warm enough to even think about sleeping again. The night has shown its teeth. You lie rigid in your cold bed, the adrenaline from the midnight repair slowly fading, replaced by a deep and profound chill. The cabin is no longer a place of potential rest. It has become an active participant in the night, a creaking, groaning vessel in a sea of cold. You close your eyes, but sleep won't come. Instead, you listen, and the night begins to speak to you in its own language. The silence you noticed earlier was an illusion, the product of a still evening, narrow, with the wind up. The cabin is filled with a symphony of unnerving sounds. The main theme is the wind itself. It's not a simple, steady howl. It's a complex and layered voice. There's the deep, bassy moan as it presses against the entire structure. There's the higher-pitched whistle from the dozen or so tiny cracks you couldn't patch. And now, thanks to your hasty repair, there's a new sound of faint, rhythmic flapping as a loose corner of the grain sack you stuffed in the wall vibrates in the draft. Layered on top of the wind are the sounds of the cabin itself. The extreme cold is making the wood contract. Every few minutes, a loud crack echoes through the room, sharp and sudden, like a dry branch snapping underfoot. It's the sound of the log walls tightening, the fibers of the wood protesting the stress of the temperature change. Sometimes it's followed by a long, low groan as the whole structure shifts infinitesimally. It sounds alive, and not in a friendly way. It sounds like it's in pain. Then there are the sounds from the roof. Your roof is likely made of shakes, which are rough, hand-split wooden shingles. In the cold, they are brittle. The wind gets under them, lifting them slightly and letting them drop with a clatter. It's a random, unsettling percussion. Click, 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 tap. It sounds like someone is up there, walking around. You know it's just the wind. But in the deep, primal part of your brain, the part that's hardwired to detect threats in the dark, knowing isn't the same as feeling. This intense auditory environment is something we've completely lost in the modern world. Our homes are insulated not just against cold, but against sound. We live in a quiet hum of refrigerators and furnaces. The idea of a house that is constantly, actively making noise is foreign to us. This is a point that sensory historians a fascinating field of study focusing on the sights, sounds, and smells of the past often emphasize. They argue that to truly understand the historical period, we have to try to reconstruct its soundscape. What was it like to live in a world where the sounds of nature and the sounds of your own shelter were so immediate and overwhelming? Did it make people more attuned to their environment, able to read the weather from the pitch of the wind's whistle, or was it a source of constant, low-grade anxiety, and an ending reminder of their vulnerability? The answer is probably both. There's a particularly strange, and a bit eerie, acoustic phenomenon that was sometimes reported in log cabins, the singing or talking walls. It likely has a scientific explanation. As the wind forced its way through the chinking, the mix of mud, grass, or moss, the fibers would sometimes vibrate at a specific frequency, creating a low, humming, or even voice-like sound. Imagine lying in the dark, listening to the walls themselves seem to murmur and whisper around you. It's no wonder that folklore from this period is so rich with tales of spirits and supernatural beings in the wilderness. In a world of such profound isolation and sensory stimulation, the line between the natural and the supernatural could easily begin to blur. You pull the heavy bearskin up over your head, trying to muffle the cacophony. It helps a little, but you can still feel the vibrations through the floor and the walls. The cabin is a giant, crude musical instrument, and the winter wind is its relentless player. Every gust brings a new combination of sounds. A sudden shriek, a low rumble, a sharp crack. It's impossible to relax. Your body remains tense, anticipating the next loud noise. Sleep. You realize there's not going to be a peaceful escape tonight. It will be a series of brief, shallow dives into unconsciousness. Punctuated by the noises of the storm, you are not sleeping in the cabin. You are sleeping with it. You are a part of its struggle against the night, and it is making sure you don't forget it. The relentless, chaotic symphony is a constant reminder that the barrier between you and the wilderness is thin, noisy, and not entirely trustworthy. Just as you start to acclimate to the symphony of the wind and wood, a new set of sounds joins the orchestra. These are quieter, closer, and somehow more unsettling. They are not the sounds of the elements, but of life. A faint, frantic scratching from inside the wall, right next to your head. A high-pitched squeak from the direction of your food stores. A soft, rustling sound from the straw mattress beneath you. You are not alone in this cabin. As the temperature plummeted outside, every living creature for acres around began a desperate search for shelter and warmth. In your cabin, with its myriad cracks and its faint, fading heat signature, is the only 5-star hotel in town. The mice were the first to arrive. They can squeeze through a hole the size of a dime. Your walls are a superhighway for them. They nest in the chin king, burrow into your straw mattress, and raise their families in the cozy, dark spaces of your home. You can hear them now, going about their nightly business. The scratching is the sound of them chewing, exploring, living their lives just an inch from your ear. The rustling beneath you is a stark reminder that you are sharing your bed not just with your family, but with a whole ecosystem of tiny, furry squatters. But it's not just mice. The promise of warmth and, more importantly, food, draws in larger, more brazen guests. Rats. They are bolder and more destructive. A rat can chew through a leather sack, a wooden box, and even soft, purely cured wood. The squeaking you hear from the corner is likely a dispute over a spilled handful of cornmeal or a crumb of dried meat. Lying in the dark, you are acutely aware of their presence. Every so often, you feel a slight vibration through the mattress as one of them scurries past. Is that a mouse running across the floor? Or was it just your imagination? The darkness plays tricks on your senses. The sounds are amplified, your imagination filling in the visual details. You picture them swarming over your meager winter supplies, contaminating what they don't eat, their sharp little teeth ruining hours of your hard work. This invasion was an accepted, if deeply unpleasant, part of winter life. It was a constant battle to protect your food. Pioneers developed all sorts of cover, low-tech solutions. They would hang food from the ceiling rafters, hoping it was out of reach. They stored grain in tin-lined wooden boxes. They kept a cat, if they were lucky, although a single cat was often no match for a full-blown infestation. A particularly grim but common sight was a rat stick, a simple club kept by the bed to be used on any rat bold enough to venture out into the open. Here's a small, disgusting detail that underscores the severity of the problem. People would sometimes wake up with rat bites. A sleeping human, warm and still, could be an object of curiosity for a hungry rat, while not a common occurrence. The fact that it happened at all is a testament to the sheer number of rodents and their boldness. Accounts from the period sometimes mention waking to a sharp nip on a finger or a toe, a horrifying intrusion into the vulnerability of sleep. The presence of these uninvited guests raises a fascinating question for historians of health and sanitation. We know that rodents are carriers of a host of diseases. How did this constant, close proximity living arrangement with mice and rats affect the health of pioneer families, while the great plagues of Europe were a thing of the past? Diseases like hantavirus carried in mouse droppings, salmonella, and various fevers were a constant threat. Was the mysterious winter fever that swept through many frontier communities simply a flu? Or was it exacerbated by the unsanitary conditions created by a cabin full of vermin? It's a point of ongoing academic research, trying to connect the dots between the environment, the animal life, and the documented illnesses of the past. It's hard to prove a direct link from a 150-year-old diary entry, but the circumstantial evidence is strong. You shift your weight, and the rustling in the mattress intensifies for a moment before going quiet. The knowledge that you are sleeping on a bed that is also a rodent condominium is deeply unsettling. The itch you feel on your leg is probably just a fold in your woolen trousers, but it could be something else. Your skin crawls. These creatures are not evil. They are like you, just trying to survive the night. They are seeking the same things you are: warmth and food. In a way, you are all in this together, trapped in this small box, waiting for the sun to rise. But this philosophical view provides little comfort when you hear the distinct sound of tiny teeth gnawing on the wooden leg of the table that holds your last sack of flour. The battle against the cold is relentless. The battle against the invaders is just as tiring. And you have to fight them both at the same time, in the dark. As if the invading rodents and the howling wind weren't enough, you become aware of a new source of discomfort. It's a stealthy, insidious kind of cold, one that doesn't announce itself with a gust of wind or a sudden noise. It's the cold that comes from below. Your bed, as we've established, is not much more than a pile of straw and pelts on a low frame. It elevates you. Yes, but only by a foot or so. Beneath that small air gap is the floor, and the floor is not wood, it's earth. Hurt, beaten, Gandel, frozen solid. You are essentially sleeping on a thin, insulated shelf just above a giant, flat block of ice. The ground outside is frozen to a depth of several feet. The steep, profound cold of the earth doesn't fluctuate much. It's a constant, stable reservoir of freezing temperatures, and your earthen floor is a direct extension of that frozen ground. It acts as a massive heat sink, constantly and silently drawing warmth out of the air in the cabin. You can feel it now, a subtle but persistent chill seeping upwards. The heavy bearskin beneath you is doing its best, its thick hardened fur acting as a shield, but it's a battle of attrition that the bearskin will eventually lose. The sheer, overwhelming cold mass of the earth will win. The chill penetrates the leather, then the wool blanket, then the straw of your mattress. It's a slow, creeping invasion. You feel it most acutely where your body makes the firmest contact with the bed, your shoulders, your hips. These pressure points have compressed the straw and fur, reducing their insulating power. In these spots, the cold feels more focused. A dull, aching chill that seems to be sinking right into your bones. It's not the sharp bite of the wind, it's a deep, heavy, and draining cold. This is why getting off the ground was so critical for survival. People understood this intuitively. Even the most rudimentary bed frame was a massive technological improvement over sleeping directly on the ground. But even with the frame, the proximity to the frozen floor was a major problem. Here's a curious detail about these floors: they were often damp. During the day, the heat from the fireplace would warm the top layer of the earthen floor, if the ground underneath was still frozen. This could cause moisture to condense on the surface, making the floor clammy and muddy, especially near the hearth. At night, as the cabin temperature plunged, this moisture would freeze. You might go to bed with a damp floor and wake up to a floor coated in a treacherous, slippery layer of frost. It was a constant cycle of melting and freezing, turning your living space into a miniature, and rather muddy, glacier. The long-term health effects of living on a cold, damp, and often frozen floor are something medical historians are still exploring. It's widely believed to have contributed to the high incidence of rheumatism, arthritis, and what was often called ague, a general term for fevers and chills, possibly related to malaria but also likely used to describe the symptoms of what we might now call influenza or pneumonia. How much of this was caused by the floor it's impossible to say for certain, but the constant, draining chill from below would have stressed the body's immune system, making people more susceptible to whatever illnesses were circulating. The debate isn't if it was unhealthy, but how unhealthy it was. Was it a primary cause of sickness, or just a contributing factor that made everything else worse? You tried to shift your position, to roll onto your side to relieve the pressure on your hip. But the move is a complex negotiation with your heavy, unwieldy blankets. The motion dislodges your carefully constructed pocket of warm air, and you're punished with a fresh wave of cold. You curl into a tight ball, pulling your knees to your chest, trying to minimize your contact with the mattress and conserve your body heat. It feels like you are lying on a thin raft in the middle of a frozen lake. The cold is not just around you, it is beneath you. It is the foundation of your world. It is patient, and it is willing. The warmth of your own body, your own life force, is slowly being leached away into the great, frozen mass of the earth. You are losing a battle you didn't even know you were fighting. And the exhaustion you feel is not just from a long day's work. It's the exhaustion of your body fighting the silent, losing war against the ground itself. It happens suddenly, without warning. One moment you are drifting in a shallow, restless sea of cold and noise. The next you are violently awake. You haven't been woken by a sound or a specific discomfort. You've been woken by your own body. A deep, uncontrollable shiver begins in your core and radiates outward, shaking your entire frame. Your teeth are chattering so hard your jaw aches. This is not the mild shivering of being a little chilly. This is a full body convulsion, an involuntary, desperate act by your muscles to generate heat. Your core temperature has dropped to a point where your brain has hit the panic button. You have officially been woken up by the cold. You are now in a state of genuine physical distress. You curl into an even tighter fetal position, pulling the heavy pelts and blankets up over your head. You try to breathe into the small space, trapping the warm, moist air from your lungs to create a tiny, temporary pocket of heat. The shaking is so intense that the straw in the mattress rustles with your every tremor. The deep, though aching chill you felt earlier from the floor has now permeated your entire body. It feels like the cold is inside you, settled deep in your marrow. Your feet are numb, 2 blocks of ice at the end of your neck. Your hands, tucked into your armpits for warmth, are clumsy and useless. This is a dangerous state to be in. If you can't get your temperature back up, you'll slip from shivering into hypothermia, a state of confusion, lethargy, and eventual death. This experience was terrifyingly common. In the journals and letters of pioneers, you often find understated references to the bitter cold of the night or suffering much from the frost. These quiet, stoic phrases hide a world of misery. They are the polite, 19th century way of saying, "I woke up in the middle of the night, shaking so violently I was afraid I might die." A truly bizarre, and frankly alarming, little-known phenomenon associated with this level of cold is something called paradoxical undressing. It's a behavior sometimes observed in the final stages of severe hypothermia, as the person becomes disoriented and their brain ceases to function properly. The blood vessels on the surface of their skin, which had been tightly constricted to conserve heat, suddenly dilate. This creates a sudden, intense sensation of being hot. The victim, in their confusion, starts to remove their clothes, believing they are overheating. It's the body's final, catastrophic system failure. While this is more commonly associated with people lost outdoors, it's not out of the question that it could have happened to someone alone and unwell inside a freezing cabin. It's a chilling thought the final act of freezing to death might be to strip off the very layers that could have saved you. You know you need to generate warmth, but your options are limited. Getting up to try and add wood to the fire is a huge risk. The brief exposure to the room's ambient temperature could be enough to push you over the edge. Your best, and perhaps only, option is to wake the person sleeping next to you. This is where the communal sleeping arrangement, for all its lack of privacy, becomes a crucial survival tool. Families didn't just sleep together for lack of space, they slept together for warmth. Huddling together, sharing body heat, was a fundamental strategy for making it through a winter night. Historical sources are full of matter-of-fact descriptions of entire families' parents and multiple children sharing a single, large bed. The debate among historians isn't whether this happened, but how it was managed. Was there a hierarchy to the bed? Did the smallest children get the warmest spot in the middle? Protected on all sides by their parents and older siblings, it seems likely. The bed was not a collection of individuals, it was a single, collective organism fighting the cold together. You reach out a shivering hand and shake the person beside you. They grunt, disturbed from their own shallow sleep. You murmur something about the cold, your teeth chattering too much to form proper words. They understand immediately. They shift, and you press your bodies together. A desperate transfer of warmth. Their body is also cold, but together, your two small furnaces are more effective than one. The shivering begins to subside, replaced by a less violent, more manageable trembling. You are no longer just an individual fighting the cold. You are part of a small, warm island in a vast, frozen sea. The shared misery makes it slightly more bearable. You lie there, huddled together, listening to the wind and the groaning house. To shivering souls waiting for a dawn that feels a lifetime away. The immediate crisis has passed, but the cold remains, a constant, menacing presence in the dark. Huddled together for warmth. Your shivering has finally subsided into a manageable tremor. Your focus, no longer consumed by your own body's rebellion, begins to drift around the dark room again. Your eyes are drawn to the hearth. The big backlog is still there, but it's more a mound of glowing charcoal than a log now. The intense, orange red glow has faded to a dull, cherry red, pulsing faintly like a dying heart. Your gaze drifts from the hearth to a spot on the floor nearby. There sits the water bucket. It's a simple wooden pail, an essential piece of household equipment. Earlier in the evening, before bed, you filled it with fresh water you hauled from the well. It's for the morning's needs, for making coffee, for washing your face, for giving the animals a drink. You left it a few feet from the fireplace, thinking the residual heat would be enough to keep it from freezing. You were wrong. Even in the profound darkness, you can see that something has changed. The surface of the water is no longer dark and liquid. It has a pale, solid look to it. The water in the bucket has frozen solid, not just a thin skim of ice on top, but a thick, solid plug. It's a stark, silent testament to the true temperature in the cabin. The room is now well below the freezing point of the 2 degrees Fahrenheit 0 Celsius. This was a daily reality for people on the frontier. Any water not kept directly next to a roaring fire would freeze overnight. Diaries from the period are filled with matter-of-fact entries like, "Water pail frozen solid this morning," or "Had to break the ice in the bucket to make breakfast." It was so common it was barely worth remarking upon. Yet it speaks volumes about the conditions they endured. The simple act of getting a drink of water in the middle of the night was an impossibility. You would have to take an axe or a heavy tool to the bucket, smash the ice into chunks, and then melt them over the fire. It was a laborious process for something as simple as quenching your thirst. This freezing had other, more subtle consequences. The bucket itself is now at risk. As water freezes, it expands. This expansion puts immense pressure on the wooden staves and iron hoops of the bucket. A well-made bucket might survive a few freeze-thaw cycles, but eventually, the pressure would find a weak spot. The wood would crack, or the hoops would snap. Waking up to find your only water bucket split and useless was a minor disaster. It meant a long, cold day of repairs, or a difficult trip to a neighbor or a distant settlement to get a new one. Here's a peculiar little bit of science that pioneers wouldn't have understood but certainly observed: the Mpemba effect. This is the counterintuitive phenomenon where, under certain conditions, hot water can freeze faster than cold water. While the exact physics are still debated by scientists today, it has to do with evaporation, convection, and dissolved gases. A pioneer who filled their bucket with warm water from a pot by the fire, thinking it would take longer to freeze, might have been surprised to find it frozen solid just as quickly as a bucket of cold water. It's a strange quirk of nature that would have added another layer of unpredictability to their nightly struggle. The frozen water bucket is more than just an inconvenience, it's a powerful symbol. It's a precise, scientific instrument telling you exactly how badly you are failing to heat your home. The romantic image of the cozy cabin is shattered by this simple, solid block of ice. It tells you that your shelter, your fortress against the wilderness, has fundamentally failed in its primary mission. The outside world has not been kept at bay, it has been invited inside. The laws of nature that govern the frozen creek outside are the same laws that are now governing the inside of your home. The academic debate here centers on adaptation. How did this constant struggle with the basics like liquid water shape the pioneer mindset? Some historians argue it fostered incredible resilience and ingenuity, forcing people to become meticulous planners and resourceful problem solvers. Every action, from where you place the water bucket to how you bank the fire, was part of a complex, high-stakes strategy for survival. Others argue that it was simply soul-crushing, the endless, repetitive, and often losing battle against the cold and its consequences could lead to a sense of fatalism and despair. Was it an empowering challenge or a demoralizing grind? The truth, as seen in the very tones of pioneer diaries, is that it was likely both, often on the same day. You look at the bucket, a pale, ghostly shape in the darkness. In the morning, your first chore would be to deal with it. But for now, it is there as a silent, frozen monument to the power of the cold. It's a reminder that you are not in a home. You are in a primitive refrigeration unit, and you just happen to be living inside it. Your gaze lifts from the frozen water bucket and sweeps across the dark room. The faint glow of the embers is just enough to illuminate the air, and you notice something that seems impossible. It looks like it's snowing. Inside your cabin, tiny, glittering specks of white are drifting lazily through the air, catching the dim reed light from the hearth before settling silently on the floor. On the table, on the top layer of your blankets, it's not a blizzard, but a gentle, persistent flurry of fine, crystalline snow. Your mind struggles to comprehend it for a moment, but then you understand. The powerful gust of wind that blew out the Chin King earlier was not an isolated event. All night, the wind has been probing and pushing at the walls. It has worked its way through 100 other, smaller imperfections. It's forcing its way through the gaps around the greased paper window, through the tiny spaces between the roof shakes, and through the moss-filled cracks between the logs. And it's not just bringing cold air in with it, it's bringing the snow. The wind outside is whipping up the fine, powdery snow that fell earlier in the day, and it's pushing this frozen dust through every available opening. The cabin is breathing. It inhales the wind and the snow, and it exhales your warmth. You look at the floor. The earthen ground near the walls is now coated with a delicate, white film. It looks like a dusting of powdered sugar. It's beautiful, in a way, but its beauty is terrifying. It's the ultimate proof of the cabin's failure. The barrier between inside and outside has become a permeable membrane. This phenomenon was shockingly common. People would write about waking up and seeing tiny snowdrifts on the floor along the walls or piled up on the windowsill. The snow was so fine and light that it could be carried on the air for a considerable distance, settling in the quietest, coldest corners of the room. A particularly absurd and miserable detail that appears in some pioneer accounts is finding snow on your own bed. If your bed was pushed up against an exterior wall, a common practice to maximize floor space, you might wake up to find that the edge of your blanket, the part closest to the wall, was covered in a miniature snowdrift that had accumulated overnight. You would have been sleeping just inches away from a tiny, personal blizzard. This indoor weather creates a whole new set of problems. As the snow settles, the faint warmth still in the room, or the warmth from your own body, might cause it to melt slightly. This creates dampness. The floor becomes thick and muddy. Your blankets become clammy. Your leather boots, left by the door, might be filled with a dusting of snow that will melt into an icy puddle when you put them on. It's a pervasive, invasive dampness that, when combined with the cold, is a recipe for misery and dullness. The historical debate around this topic is one of degrees. We know from countless sources that this happened. What's less clear is how severe it typically was. Were most nights just a gentle, almost magical dusting of diamond dust? Are some colder or were severe winter storms capable of depositing significant, disruptive amounts of snow inside the cabin? The answer likely depends on the quality of the cabin's construction and the severity of the storm. Historians analyzed the specific wording of diary entries. Was it a skiff of snow or the floor was white with it to try and gauge the true extent of the problem. It highlights the vast difference in experience between a good cabin and a bad one, a difference that could have been the margin between endurance and genuine suffering. You watch the tiny snowflakes swirl in the ember light. It's a surreal, almost dreamlike sight. The world has been turned inside out. The weather is supposed to be out there. You built these walls to keep it at bay. But the wilderness does not respect your intentions. It has found a way in. The snow is a quiet, gentle reminder of your own insignificance in the face of its power. It doesn't need to batter down your door. It can dismantle your sense of security one tiny, glittering flake at a time. Lying there, you feel a profound sense of vulnerability. You are not in a shelter from the storm. You are simply in a slightly less intense part of the storm itself. The air in the cabin is now so cold that a new and startling phenomenon begins to occur. You shift slightly, turning your head to face the open room, and you exhale. The breath leaves your mouth and, for a fleeting second, it becomes visible. A plume of white vapor, a miniature cloud, blossoms in the darkness before dissipating. You have seen your own breath. Inside, this is a threshold. It's the point where the temperature in the room has dropped so low, and the humidity is just right, that the moisture in your warm breath condenses instantly upon hitting the frigid air. It's the same effect you see when you're outside on a cold day, but experiencing it within the four walls of your supposed shelter is profoundly disheartening. You take another breath, deeper this time, and watch the cloud form again. It's a tangible, visible representation of your own life, your own wants, being released into the cold and immediately swallowed by it. Each breath you take is a small, quantifiable loss of heat and moisture into an environment that is actively hostile to both. You are no longer just feeling the cold, you are seeing it. You are interacting with it in a direct, physical way. The simple, unconscious act of breathing has become a visual reminder of the battle your body is fighting. This was a universal experience for those wintering on the frontier, a sign that the night had reached its deepest point of cold. It appears in countless diaries and letters, often mentioned with a kind of weary resignation. It was so cold last night. We could see our breath in the cabin. They'd write. It was a benchmark of misery, a shared understanding of just how bad things had gotten. A strange little side effect of this is the frost that would form around your mouth and nose as you slept. If you slept with your face exposed to the air, the constant exhalation of warm, moist breath would condense and freeze on any surface it touched. This included your own facial hair if you had any. Or, more disturbingly, the edge of the blanket or pelt pulled up to your chin. People would describe waking up with their beards stiff with ice, or finding that their blanket was frozen to their face in a rime of frost. It's a bizarre and deeply uncomfortable image. This leads to a wider question that historians of medicine and physiology grapple with: what were the respiratory consequences of breathing this intensely cold, and often smoky, air for hours on end? Every single night for months are designed to warm and humidify the air we breathe before it reaches the delicate tissues deep inside. But when the air is this cold, the system is overwhelmed. Breathing frigid air can cause bronchoconstriction, an irritation and tightening of the airways, leading to coughing and shortness of breath. Over the long term, it could exacerbate conditions like asthma or lead to chronic bronchitis, the winter coughs that were a constant plague in these communities. The academic debate centers on whether the human body can truly adapt to these conditions. Is there a physiological adaptation that occurs after months of exposure, making the lungs more resilient, or does the body simply sustain cumulative damage over time, leading to a shorter life expectancy and a higher rate of chronic respiratory disease? Studies of modern populations living in extreme cold, like Arctic indigenous communities, suggest that some adaptation is possible, but the pioneers did not have millennia of genetic selection on their side. They were, for the most part, Europeans whose bodies were accustomed to a far milder climate. Thrown into a brutal environmental challenge, the seasoning period for new settlers, where many fell ill, was likely their bodies violent, and sometimes failed, attempt to acclimate to a host of new environmental stresses, with the cold air being a major one. You pull the covers up over your nose, creating a small breathing tunnel. This is a common trick. By breathing into the space under the covers, the air gets dropped, and you end up breathing some of your own warm, moist exhalations. This helps to warm and humidify the air before it enters your lungs. The downside is that the air quickly becomes stale and stuffy, thick with the smell of sleep and old wool, but it's a trade-off you are more than willing to make. The relief from the sharp, icy sting of the cabin air is immediate. You lie there, under your heavy mound of bedding, breathing into your own small, self-made atmosphere. You can still hear the wind outside, still feel the deep, penetrating cold from the floor. But you have created a tiny, temporary truce in your personal war against the cold. Each misty breath you took in the open air was a reminder of your vulnerability. Each breath you take now, in your stuffy little cave, is a small, defiant act of survival. Tucked away in your breathing tunnel beneath the covers, you've managed to create a small zone of relative comfort. The air you're breathing is warm and stale, a welcome relief from the icy sharpness of the room. You start to drift off again, a sense of weary security settling over you. But then, you feel something strange on your cheek. It's a cold, slightly damp sensation. You instantly reach up to brush it away, thinking it's just a loose thread from the blanket. Your fingers touch your cheek, and then they touch the surface of the topmost blanket, the one directly exposed to the cabin air. Your fingers come away with a fine, crunchy, crystalline substance. It's frost. In the profound cold of the room, a layer of frost has formed on the outside of your bedclothes. It's the same principle as the frost on a window pane. Your body heat, your life force, has been slowly seeping through the heavy layers of wool and fur. When this tiny amount of warm, moist air met the frigid air of the cabin, it condensed and froze directly onto the fabric. Your own body heat has created a delicate, beautiful, and utterly horrifying shell of ice on top of your own bed. You are, in effect, sleeping inside a miniature igloo made of blankets, insulated by a layer of frost of your own making. You poke your head out of your warm cocoon and look. In the dim, failing light of the embers, you can see it clearly. The heavy, dark wool of the top blanket has a silvery, shimmering sheen to it. It's most prominent over the area where your body is, a ghostly map of your own warmth. This was a well-documented and surprisingly common occurrence. Settlers on the Great Plains, where winters were especially brutal and there was little to block the wind, wrote about it with a kind of grim awe. They would describe their blankets being white with frost in the morning, or stiff with ice. Sometimes, the frost would be so thick that the blanket would make a crackling sound when they moved. This frozen layer had a strange, paradoxical effect. On one hand, it was the ultimate symbol of the cold's victory. It meant the temperature in the room was so far below freezing that it could overcome the insulation of multiple heavy blankets. On the other hand, a thin layer of ice and the trapped air within the frost crystals can actually be a decent insulator. It's the same principle that makes a layer of snow a good insulator for plants and hibernating animals. So in a bizarre twist, the frost that signaled your failure to stay warm might have actually been helping you, just a little bit, to not get any colder. A particularly miserable variation of this was when the frost would melt. If someone got up in the middle of the night to stoke the fire, or in the morning when the fire was rebuilt, the sudden wave of heat would cause the frost on the blankets to melt. This didn't turn it back into dry vapor, it turned it into cold, clammy water. Your insulating layers would become damp, making them less effective and profoundly uncomfortable. You might go to sleep cold and wake up cold and wet. The historical question here is one of material science. How did different materials react to this frosting? We know wool insulates when wet, which is why it was so prized. But what about a cotton quilt or a deerskin pelt? Historians, sometimes working with museum textile experts, have examined surviving pioneer bedding to understand its properties. They look at the weave of the fabric, the type of fibers, and the thickness of the material to theorize about how it would have performed under these extreme conditions. The consensus is that the material choices were not accidental. The heavy reliance on wool and fur was a direct result of generations of trial and error. People used what worked, because the alternative was freezing. This wasn't about fashion or comfort in the modern sense, it was about thermal dynamics and survival. You stare at the shimmering frost on your blanket, a delicate, crystalline web spun by the cold. It's a chillingly beautiful sight. It's proof that you are losing heat, that the cabin is failing, that the night is winning, but you are still here. You are still breathing. The frost is a sign of the cold's power, but the fact that it exists at all is a sign of your own warmth, your own stubborn, persistent life. You dip back down into your small tunnel of warm air, pulling the frosty blanket a little tighter. The night isn't over yet. You are trapped, not by the snow, not by the cold, but by a simple, primal, and increasingly urgent biological need. You have to pay. This, right here, is the moment of greatest psychological torment in a pioneer's winter night. It's the ultimate test of will. You are lying in a marginally survivable pocket of warmth that you've spent hours cultivating. To leave it, even for a minute, is to abandon your sanctuary and plunge yourself back into the brutal, shocking cold of the cabin. The debate begins in your mind. Maybe you can ignore it. Maybe it will go away. You try shifting your position, thinking of other things, but it's no use. The pressure is insistent. A relentless, internal alarm clock. You know you can't hold it until morning. The sun is still hours away. So you are faced with a terrible choice. What are your options? Option 1, the great outdoors. This involves getting out of bed, finding your frozen stiff boots, forcing your numb feet into them, unlatching the cabin door, and stepping out into the full, magnificent, and life-threatening fury of a winter night. You would be exposed to the wind, the deep snow, and a temperature that could be 20, 30, or even 40 degrees below freezing. It is an option so monumentally unpleasant that it's almost unthinkable. The shock to your system would be immense, and the journey back to warmth would be long and painful. Option 2, the chamber pot. This is the more civilized and far more common solution. Somewhere in the dark, cold cabin, there is a chamber pot. It's a simple ceramic or pewter pot with a lid. The indoor toilet at stay. Using it means you only have to brave the cold of the cabin, not the wilderness outside. But it comes with its own set of miseries. First, you still have to get out of bed. The floor is ice cold. The air is a physical shock. You will be shivering violently in seconds. Second, you have to find the pot in the near total darkness, stumbling over stools and trying not to step on a sleeping dog or a scavenging rat. Third, and this is the truly dreadful part, the pot itself is at ambient temperature. The seat, if it can be called that, is a ring of ice-cold ceramic that will feel like a brand against your skin. It is a uniquely unpleasant sensation. And then there's the aftermath. You now have a pot of liquid, sitting in a room that is well below freezing. If you don't put the lid back on securely, and if the night is cold enough, its contents could freeze. This was a genuine, if disgusting, problem. Furthermore, the pot remains in the room with you. In a small, single-room cabin, there is no separate, ventilated bathroom. The chamber pot and its odors are your roommates until morning, when someone has the unenviable chore of taking it outside to be emptied. This brings us to a slightly indelicate but historically significant detail, the slop jar or thunder mug, as it was sometimes colloquially known. What did people do with them in the morning? Especially in deep winter, you couldn't just dump the contents near the door, as it would create a frozen, unsanitary mess. The chore often involved a grim trip to the outhouse, or to a designated spot far from the cabin. It was one of the least pleasant tasks of frontier life, and one that fell disproportionately to women and children. The historical debate around sanitation and hygiene in these conditions is fascinating. How did the lack of modern plumbing and the close proximity to human waste affect health and the spread of disease? Historians of sanitation point out that while the situation seems appalling to us, the extreme cold had a silver lining. It suppressed the growth of bacteria and reduced odors. A frozen chamber pot is, in some ways, less of an immediate health hazard than an open latrine in a hot climate. The real danger came during the spring thaw, when all the accumulated waste from the winter would melt, potentially contaminating the ground and nearby water sources like wells. Was the spring sickness that often afflicted pioneer communities a result of this seasonal, large-scale contamination? It's a compelling and widely supported theory. You lie there, the internal pressure building. The mental calculation is excruciating. The warmth of the bed versus the agony of the cold, the fleeting relief versus the prolonged misery of the journey. Every pioneer who ever survived winter faced this exact dilemma, night after night. It's a small, undignified, and completely unromanticized part of the story, but it is one of the most relatable human experiences of this entire ordeal. With a final, resigned sigh that fogs up the air in your cocoon, you make your choice. The port. You brace yourself, take a deep breath, and throw back the covers. The cold hits you like a physical blow. The decision is made. The ordeal is about to begin. Having braved the icy floor and the shocking cold of the chamber pot, you are now back in your nest of blankets. But sleep is even further away than before. The brief, brutal excursion has completely reset your body's thermostat. You are shivering again. A deep, rattling cold that seems to have settled permanently into your joints. And as you lie there, waiting for a warmth that feels like it will never return, you become aware of something else. The smell. The cabin doesn't just have a temperature, it has an odor. It's a complex, layered scent that you become desensitized to during the day, but in the stillness and confinement of the night, it becomes more potent, almost suffocating. The air is thick and stagnant, a repository for every smell generated in this small, unventilated space for the past several months. The most dominant note in this olfactory symphony is smoke, not the clean, pleasant smell of a fresh pine fire, but the old, stale, greasy scent of wood smoke that has permeated every surface. The log rolls, the earthen floor, your clothes, your bedding, everything is impregnated with it. It's the smell of 1,000 past fires, a scent that will cling to you until the spring thaw. Mixed with the smoke is the smell of the chinking in the walls. If it's made of mud and grass, it gives off a damp, earthy, almost cellar-like odor. If it was made with manure, on a particularly damp night, it might carry a faint, unpleasant whiff of the barnyard. It's the smell of your own insulation. Then there's the smell of unwashed bodies and damp wool. In a world where bathing in the winter was a rare and difficult luxury, and laundry was an even bigger chore, clothes and blankets were worn for long stretches. The dampness from melted snow, condensation, and sweat never truly dried in the cold, creating a permanent, musty, and a more icy scent. Lull, for all its insulating genius, has a particularly strong, lanolin-rich smell when it gets damp. Your cozy cocoon is a cloud of it. Add to this the faint, but sharp, ammonia-like tang from the corner where the mice and rats are most active. Then down, the newest addition to the room's perfume, the unavoidable, unpleasant odor from the chamber pot you just used. This intense sensory environment is a far cry from the modern ideal of a clean, fresh-smelling home. It was simply the reality of life. This brings up a curious historical question. Did people in the past have a less sensitive sense of smell, or were they just so accustomed to strong odors that they didn't notice them? The field of sensory history suggests the latter is more likely. Their normal was simply different from ours. They lived in a world rich with powerful, often unpleasant smells, from the tannery down the street in a city to the inside of their own cabin on the frontier. The academic debate often revolves around the idea of olfactory landscapes. Historians try to reconstruct not just what the past looked like, but what it smelled like, arguing that smell is a powerful, if often overlooked, component of historical experience. To understand the pioneer, you have to understand that their world smelled of smoke, sweat, and earth. A particularly strange and specific smell that some settlers reported was the scent of ozone or static electricity on the very coldest, driest nights. The air would become so dry that static electricity would build up on surfaces, especially on the fur blanket. Moving under the covers could create a series of tiny, crackling sparks. Some people claimed they could smell it in the air, a sharp, metallic, almost electric scent, similar to the smell after a nearby lightning strike. It was the smell of the air itself being altered by the extreme cold and lack of humidity. You tried to breathe through your mouth. To avoid the thick, cloying air, you pull the musty-smelling blanket over your nose, which only replaces the room's smell with the blanket smell. There is no escape. The cabin is a sealed jar of scents, and you are trapped inside it. The smell is more than just an unpleasantness. It's a reminder of your confinement. It's the smell of poverty, of a lack of ventilation, of a constant struggle against decay and dampness. It is the opposite of the clean, crisp, cold air outside. You are sealed in here with the accumulated evidence of your own existence. The air is heavy with the past, and it offers no relief. You lie there, cold and shivering, breathing the thick, tired air of your own small, smelly world. After what feels like an eternity of shivering and listening to the sounds of the night, you notice a subtle shift in the darkness. The absolute, impenetrable black of the cabin's interior is beginning to soften. You look towards the greased paper window. It is no longer a void. It is now a faint, ghostly rectangle of deep, washed-out grey. It's the first hint of dawn. A small, weary surge of hope flickers within you. The night, for all its terror and misery, is not infinite. The sun is returning. The ordeal is almost over. But this is not the cheerful, golden dawn of a summer morning. This is a winter dawn, and it arrives with a profound sense of anticlimax. The grey light that filters through the old paper is thin, weak, and utterly devoid of warmth. It doesn't illuminate the cabin so much as it reveals its squalor. The friendly, dancing shadows cast by the fire are gone. In their place, the cold, flat light of morning exposes every detail you couldn't see in the dark. The dusting of snow on the floor is no longer magical, it's a dirty, slightly melted mess. The crude patch you made in the wall is revealed for what it is, a bundle of old rags and a grain sack, a testament to your desperation. The piles of clutter in the corners, the unwashed pot from last night's stew, the general state of disarray, it's all laid bare. The cabin, which felt like a fortress at sunset, now looks like what it is, a primitive, struggling shelter on the verge of being overwhelmed. This weak, grey light brings no comfort. In fact, it seems to make the cold feel even more intense. You can now see the frost on your blanket with perfect clarity. You can see the thick, solid ice in the water bucket. You can see your own breath, a steady plume of vapor in the still air. The visual confirmation of the cold somehow makes it feel more real, more penetrating. This experience of a false dawn, where the light arrives long before any perceptible warmth, is a key feature of life in extreme cold. It was a moment of psychological challenge. The hope inspired by the light would quickly curdle into a deeper weariness as the reality of the cold, now fully visible, reasserted itself. A strange little detail that some diarists noted was how colors seemed to change in this early morning light. The intense cold and the specific quality of the light filtering through snow clouds could make the world outside seem monochromatic. A landscape of only white, black, and shades of grey. This visual bleakness would seep into the cabin, stripping the color from the patched quilts and the familiar objects of the room, rendering everything in a palette of exhaustion. The historical debate here often touches on the psychological impact of light, or the lack thereof, on the frontier. The lone, dark winters with their weak, short days were a recipe for what we now call seasonal affective disorder (SAD). How did pioneers cope with months of this dim, grey existence? Did the brief, glorious light of the summer months provide enough of a psychological buffer to get them through the winter, or did the relentless gloom contribute to the feelings of depression and prairie madness that were so widely reported? Historians look for clues in the tone of letters written in different seasons. A letter written in the cheerful light of June is often optimistic and full of plans. One written in the grey gloom of January is often focused on hardship, health, and survival. It's a compelling argument that their mental state was profoundly tied to the quality of the light around them. You lie still, reluctant to move. The bed, for all its flaws, is still the warmest place in the universe. Leaving it now means accepting that the day has begun, and with it, the endless cycle of chores, the first and most important of which will be reviving the fire. You can see the hearth clearly now. The embers that glowed so brightly just a few hours ago are now almost entirely coated in a soft, grey ash. There is no light coming from them, no perceptible heat. The heart of the cabin has gone cold. The grey light continues to strengthen, minute by minute. The world outside is waking up, but your world, the world inside these four walls, is at its coldest and most desolate point. This is the Maida, the moment of maximum cold, just before the sun's energy begins its slow, arduous work of warming the planet. You have survived the night, but the morning, in its own quiet, bleak way, might be even worse. The time for hiding is over. The grey light has filled the cabin, and the day's responsibilities are calling. Your first, most critical task, upon which all other tasks depend, is to resurrect the fire. With a final, pained groan, you throw off the heavy, frost-covered blankets. The air in the cabin is at its absolute coldest point of the day, and it hits you with the force of a physical blow. The brief journey from your bed to the hearth feels like a polar expedition. Your bare feet or thinly socked feet on the frozen, snow-dusted earthen floor send jolts of pain up your legs. You are shivering violently before you've even taken 3 steps. You kneel before the cold, silent fireplace. It looks like a tomb. The stones are frigid, and the opening is a black void. Everything hinges on what lies beneath that thick blanket of grey ash. Did the backlog do its job? Are there any living embers left? You reach for a small stick you keep for this purpose and begin to gently, carefully, probe the ashes. This is a delicate surgical procedure. If you are too rough, you will extinguish what little life might be left. If you're too timid, you won't find it. You push the ash aside, creating a small clearing. You lean in close, your face just inches from the hearth, and you blow. Not a strong puff, but a gentle, steady stream of air, directed at the base of the ash pile. For a moment, nothing happens. A plume of cold ash puffs up into your face, tasting of sudden failure. Your heart sinks. Starting a fire from scratch with flint and steel on a morning like this, with numb, clumsy fingers, is a miserable, soul-crushing chore. You try again, blowing from a slightly different angle, and then you see it. A tiny, miraculous speck of orange, no bigger than a pinhead, winks at you from the depths of the ash. It's alive. A wave of relief washes over you. The day is not lost. You now work with a surgeon's focus. You continue to blow gently, coaxing the tiny ember. It glows brighter, growing to the size of a pea. You have a small nest of the driest tinder imaginable ready and waiting: cedar bark shavings, a bit of lint from a pocket, a dried fungus. You carefully place this nest next to the ember and push the glowing coal into its embrace. You blow again, more urgently now. The tinder begins to smoke. It's a promising sign, but not a guarantee. The smoke is thin and white. You need it to be thicker, yellower. You keep blowing, your cheeks aching, your head feeling light from the effort. And then, with a soft, magical whoosh, a tiny, fragile flame flickers to life. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. This daily ritual of reviving the fire was the cornerstone of pioneer life. A family's comfort, their ability to cook, and their very survival depended on successfully transitioning from the embers of one day to the fire of the next. The responsibility often fell to one person, who would rise before everyone else in the cold and dark to perform this vital task. A fascinating bit of historical trivia is the concept of borrowing fire. If your fire went out completely and you were out of tinder, or your flint and steel were damp, you had a serious problem. The solution was to take a covered pot or a firebox and make a desperate, phrasing journey to your nearest neighbor, who might live miles away, to borrow some of their hot coals to bring back and restart your own hearth. It was an act of communal reliance born of shared hardship, and a powerful illustration of how vital a continuous fire was. The question of what constituted the best tinder is a subject of endless fascination for historians and survival enthusiasts. The historical record is full of different recipes and preferred materials, varying by region. Char cloth, a piece of linen or cotton cloth that has been charred in an airtight tin, was a prize. Man-made tinder that could catch a spark with incredible ease. Tunk wood, the soft, crumbly wood from a decaying tree, was another favorite. This folk knowledge, this deep understanding of the natural world and its flammable properties, was a critical and often unwritten part of the pioneer's skill set. Academics studying traditional ecological knowledge see this as a sophisticated, localized science, passed down through generations. The tiny flame is still fragile. You feed it carefully, first with the smallest twigs, then slightly larger ones, then finally a small log. The fire begins to grow, to crackle, to push back the oppressive cold and gloom. The light changes from grey to a warm, flickering orange. The shadows begin to dance again. You have done it. You have brought the heart of the cabin back to life. You hold your frozen, aching hands out to the growing wall, and for the first time since sunset, you feel a genuine sense of hope. The long, cold night is finally, truly over. The fire is back, a small but growing sun in the center of your cold universe. The warmth begins to radiate outwards, not yet hitting the room, but creating a small circle of survivability around the hearth, now that the immediate crisis of firelessness is over. The second task of the morning presents itself: damage assessment. You need to see what the night has cost you. Your first stop is the food supply. You walk over to the corner that serves as your pantry. It's not a separate room, but a collection of wooden boxes, burlap sacks, and shelves nailed to the wall. This is your wealth. This is the food that has to last you until the spring fall. Your stomach tightens with a familiar knot of anxiety as you begin your inspection. You open the lid of the large wooden bin that holds your flour. You run your hand across the surface. Immediately, you see the evidence you were reading: a scattering of tiny, dark droppings and a network of small tracks crisscrossing the white surface. The rats were here. They found a small gap in the lid and managed to squeeze in. You scoop out the contaminated top layer with a sigh of resignation. It's a painful loss. Every ounce of flour is precious, the result of a long season of planting, harvesting, and grinding. To see it spoiled by vermin feels like a personal insult. You check the sack of cornmeal next. It's been gnawed at. A small hole in the corner leaking a fine yellow dust onto the floor. More loss. This constant, low-level warfare with pests was a major source of stress and economic loss for pioneers. It wasn't just about the food they ate, it was about the seed grain they needed for the next year's planting. If rodents got into the seed stock, it could jeopardize the entire future of the homestead. This brings up a fascinating and slightly gruesome bit of historical pest control: the cabin cat. A good mouser was not just a pet, it was an essential piece of farm equipment, as valuable as an axe or a plow. These were not the pampered, well-fed house cats we know today. They were semi-feral, hard-working predators, expected to earn their keep. But here's the grim part: to keep them motivated, a farmer might intentionally keep the cat slightly hungry. The belief was that a hungry cat was a better hunter. So the very animal you relied on to protect your food was often kept in a state of perpetual want. It was a pragmatic, if harsh, calculation of survival. You move on from the food to check the rest of the cabin's infrastructure. You look at the water bucket. The ice is so thick that the wooden sides of the bucket are visibly bulging outwards. You tap it with your knuckle, and the wood feels strained, tight as a drum skin. Another few nights like this and it will surely split. You inspect the leather. The harness strap you mended last night is stiff as a board. Any leather goods left exposed to the damp and cold would absorb moisture and then freeze, making them brittle and prone to cracking. Your boots, your belt, the leather hinges on the door, all of it has been weakened by the night. Part of your day will now be spent rubbing them with tallow or lard to try and restore some of their flexibility. The academic debate here focuses on the hidden labor of frontier life. Historians of women's work and domestic economies argue that traditional historical narratives, focused on farming and building, often ignore the immense amount of labor that went into simple maintenance and repair. This constant, repetitive, and often invisible work, patching walls, protecting food, mending clothes, maintaining tools, was absolutely essential for the survival of the household. It wasn't glorious, and it didn't produce a crop. But without this endless cycle of nightly loss and daily repair, the entire enterprise would have collapsed. It's a perspective that race enters the history of the frontier not just on the grand acts of settlement, but on the small, vital acts of perseverance. Your inventory of the night's losses is complete. Flour spoiled, cornmeal stolen, a water bucket on the verge of ruin, and leather goods weakened. None of it is catastrophic on its own, but it's the accumulation of these small losses, night after night, that wears you down. It's a constant drain on your resources, your energy, and your morale. Survival isn't about winning one great battle against the wilderness. It's about surviving 1,000 tiny defeats and finding the will to start the next day, ready to face them all over again. You stare into the growing flames of the fire. The warmth on your face a small comfort against the chilling tally of what the darkness has taken. The fire is now a respectable blaze, and the initial, shocking chill of the cabin is beginning to retreat. You are no longer in immediate physical distress. And in this new, marginal state of comfort, you do something for the first time since you stumbled into the cabin last night. You truly look around. With the clear, unforgiving light of morning filling the room, the illusion of the cozy cabin, which flickered to life with the evening fire, is now completely and utterly shattered. The romance is gone. What's left is the grim reality. The walls, which seemed so solid and protective, are revealed for what they are: rough, uneven logs, caked with dirt and soot. The Chin King is a messy patchwork of dried mud, moss, and old rags, crumbling in a dozen places. You can see the light shining through several small cracks you hadn't even noticed before. The whole structure looks temporary, fragile, and inadequate. The floor is not a rustic, charming feature. It's dirt. There are dark, damp patches near the hearth where melted snow and spilled water have turned it to mud. In the corners, there are accumulations of dust, wood shavings, and the debris of daily life. The dusting of snow from the night now highlights the tracks of mice, a chaotic roadmap of their nocturnal pillaging. Your furniture, what little of it there is, looks pathetic in the morning light. The three-legged stools are wobbly and stained. The table is a crude plank of wood, its surface scarred with knife marks and burns. Everything is functional, but nothing is beautiful. There is no adornment, no comfort, no sense of home in the modern sense. It is a workstation, a barracks, a shelter, not a sanctuary. This stark reality check is a recurring theme in the letters of more genteel settlers, particularly women, who moved to the frontier from established towns in the east. They would arrive with romantic, literary notions of log cabin life, images formed by books and paintings. Their first morning in a real cabin was often a moment of profound shock and disillusionment. Their letters home are filled with despair at the dirt, the drafts, the crudeness of it all. It is not a home, but a hovel, one might write. This leads to a fascinating historical debate about the aesthetics of poverty versus the aesthetics of romanticism. When we look at a photograph or a museum reconstruction of a log cabin today, we often view it through a romantic lens. We see the hand-hewn logs and the simple furniture as authentic, charming, and desirable. But for the people who lived there, these were not aesthetic choices. They were the physical manifestations of their poverty and their limited resources. The academic question is, at what point in history did we stop seeing these objects as signs of hardship and start seeing them as symbols of a noble, simple past? This shift in perception, historians argue, tells us more about the anxieties and desires of our own modern, industrialized society than it does about the actual lived experience of the pioneers. We romanticize what we lack, and we often lack a sense of connection to the basics of our own survival. A particularly bleak and often overlooked detail is the lack of light. The single, greased paper window allows in a miserable, grey, translucent glow, but it offers no view. You cannot see the sky. You cannot see the trees. It's like living in a room with a permanently fogged-up window. This lack of a visual connection to the outside world, especially during the long winter months when the door was kept shut, would have been profoundly isolating and depressing. It's one thing to be isolated in the wilderness, it's another to be trapped in a box that doesn't even allow you to see it. You stand in the middle of the room, slowly turning, taking it all in. The dream of the cozy cabin, a warm and welcoming haven, has evaporated with the morning light. You see the immense, unending amount of work that surrounds you. The floor needs to be swept. The walls need to be raised, chinked. The bedding needs to be aired out. The tools need to be cleaned. The whole structure is in a constant state of entropy, and your life is a constant battle to hold it together. There is no comfort here. There is only the next task. The brief sense of victory you felt when you revived the fire is gone, replaced by the weary recognition of the day ahead. You have survived the night. But survival, you realize, is not an achievement. It's just the starting point for another day of the same struggle. The fire is now hot enough to cook on. It's time for breakfast. But the idea of a hearty, cheerful morning meal is a fantasy that belongs to a different, normal world. Your breakfast will be as cold, practical, and joyless as the cabin itself. You start with the water. You pick up the frozen water bucket. It's heavy, a solid block of ice and wood. You carry it to the hearth and tip it on its side, trying to slide the great plug of ice out into a large iron pot. It won't budge. It's frozen fast to the sides. With a sigh, you place the entire bucket close to the fire, hoping the ambient heat will eventually melt the edges enough to release the ice. It's a slow, frustrating process. While you wait for your water to de-ice, you turn to the food. You don't have fresh bread or eggs. You have what's left of yesterday. You find a chunk of cornbread, left over from a previous meal. It's as hard as a rock and feels just as cold. You place it on a stone at the edge of the hearth, hoping to warm it through, but it will likely just get scorched on the outside while the inside remains a dense, cold brick. The main course is jerky, strips of dried, salted meat that require serious, prolonged stewing to become edible. It's pure protein and salt, fuel for the day's hard labor. It's not a pleasure to eat, it's a chore. You gnaw on a piece, the cold, leathery meat resisting your every bite. Finally, the ice in the bucket has melted just enough around the edges. With a loud shorpie, the massive cylinder of ice slides out and crashes into the iron pot. You hang the pot over the fire. Now you must wait again for a solid block of ice to melt and then slowly come to a boil, just so you can have a cup of coffee. This struggle for the basics is what defined the morning routine. Nothing was easy. Everything took time and effort. The simple act of making a hot drink, which first takes minutes, could be a 30-minute ordeal of melting, waiting, and tending the fire. This brings us to a curious and much debated topic among food historians: the pioneer diet. Was it a healthy, organic, whole food diet, free from modern processed ingredients, or was it a monotonous, nutritionally deficient diet that lead to chronic health problems. The truth is complex. On one hand, their food was certainly whole. They ate what they grew or hunted. On the other hand, it lacked variety, especially in winter. The diet was incredibly heavy in salted meat, corn, and whatever root vegetables they managed to store. Fresh fruits and vegetables were non-existent for months on end. This led to widespread, if often undiagnosed, nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a real and persistent threat on the frontier, causing lethargy, tooth loss, and eventually death. People didn't understand the science, but they knew about prairie scurvy and tried to combat it in the spring by foraging for the first green shoots and wild onions they could find. A particularly unappetizing breakfast staple, born of necessity, was mush. This could be made from cornmeal, oats, or whatever grain was on hand. It was boiled with water or, if you were lucky, milk, until it formed a thick, porridge-like substance. It was bland, but it was hot and filling. Sometimes, to make it more palatable, it was sweetened with molasses or, for a savory twist, flavored with bacon grease saved from a previous meal. The thought of a bowl of cornmeal mush swimming in cold, congealed bacon fat is not exactly appealing to the modern palate, but for a pioneer, it was a welcome dose of calories on a cold morning. The water in your pot is finally boiling. You spoon in some coffee grounds and let it steep. There's no fancy filter. The result is a gritty, bitter, but wonderfully hot liquid. You pour it into a tin cup, which immediately becomes too hot to hold, and you wait for it to cool just enough to drink. You sit on your wobbly stool, holding your warm cup, gnawing on your jerky, and waiting for your cornbread to thaw. This is your reward for surviving the night. A breakfast of cold, hard food in hot, bitter coffee. It's not a meal to be savored. It's fuel. It's the bare minimum required to get your body moving, to give you the energy to step outside and face another day of the same back-breaking, soul-crushing work. You drink your coffee, the warmth spreading through your chest, and you prepare to do it all over again. The last of the bitter, gritty coffee is gone. The warmth it gave you is already fading. You force down the cold cornbread and leathery jerky. Breakfast is over. The time for hiding inside is at an end. The day's work, the real work, awaits you outside. You stand up and begin the process of armoring yourself against the cold. You pull on your heavy wool coat, the one that served as an extra blanket all night. It stiffens, smells of smoke and dampness. You wrap a scarf around your neck, tucking it in tightly. You pull on your thick leather gloves, your fingers still feeling clumsy and not quite your own. Finally, you approach your boots. They stand by the door where you left them, rigid and frozen. Forcing your feet into them is an act of sheer will, the cold leather refusing to yield. It feels like putting your feet into 2 blocks of ice. You walk to the door, your every movement stiff and reluctant. You place your hand on the wooden latch. It's cold enough to feel sharp. You take a deep breath of the smoky, steel cabinet one last time, bracing yourself for the shock. With a familiar groan of protest from the leather hinges, you pull the heavy door open. The world that greets you is stunningly bright and brutally cold. The morning sun, now fully risen, strikes the endless expanse of snow, and the reflection is a blinding, painful glare. You squint, your eyes watering instantly from the cold and the light. The air is perfectly still and razor sharp. To breathe it in is to feel a searing cold deep in your lungs. It is a world of absolute white and brilliant blue, beautiful and completely indifferent to your existence. You step outside, and the cold envelops you. It's a different kind of cold from the damp, penetrating chill of the cabin. This is a clean, chill, aggressive cold. It finds every tiny gap in your clothing, every exposed bit of skin on your face. You can feel the moisture in your nostrils begin to freeze. You look back at the cabin, from the outside. It looks almost picturesque. A dull, solid shape in a sea of white, with a thin ribbon of grey smoke curling from its chimney into the vast blue sky. It looks like the romantic image. It looks like the dream. But you know the truth. You know about the drafts, the rodents, the frozen water, the frost on the blankets. You know the misery contained within those four walls. The first task is to clear a path. Snow has drifted up against the door overnight, and you'll need to shovel your way to the woodpile, to the well, to the animal shed. You pick up the heavy wooden shovel. The handle is so cold it feels like it's burning your gloves. Each shovel a few ell of snow is heavy, and the work is instantly taxing. Your breath comes in great, white plumes. This is your life now, until the spring. A constant, repetitive cycle of struggle. The hard labor of the day, earning you just enough food and firewood to survive the misery of the night. And the misery of the night slowly draining you of the energy you need for the day. It's a perfect, closed loop of hardship. Historians often debate the ultimate meaning of the frontier experience. Was it a story of triumph? Of rugged individuals carving a great nation out of the wilderness? This was the dominant narrative for a long time. Or was it a more complex, and often tragic, story of human struggle against overwhelming environmental and economic forces, a story of displacement, of failure, of quiet desperation? The academic consensus has shifted towards the latter, more nuanced view. They argue that for every successful homesteader who tamed the land, there were countless others who were broken by it, who lost their farms, their health, or their minds. The story isn't just about the winners who wrote the diaries, it's also about the silent majority who simply disappeared from the historical record. You pause your shoveling for a moment to catch your breath, leaning on the handle. You look out at the horizon. There is nothing. No other cabins, no other smoke rising. Just the endless, rolling expanse of snow and sky. The silence is absolute, broken only by the sound of your own harsh breathing and the squeak of your boots on the snow. You know that tonight, the sun will abandon you again. The wind will rise. The temperature will plummet. You will retreat back into that cold, damp box. You will stoke the fire, feel the drafts, hear the strange noises. You will check your food supplies, huddle under your frosty blankets, and fight the same battles all over again. Nothing has been solved. Nothing has been conquered. You have simply earned one more day. And as you lift the shovel to continue your work, that feels like everything. The day fades, as it always does, into the same biting cold of the evening before. The sun bleeds out across the snow, and you find yourself once more at the door of your small, dark shelter, another bundle of firewood in your arms. The wind is already beginning its nightly song, a low hum that promises another long, calm vigil. You step inside, and the cycle begins anew. The slow, patient work of building a fire, the temporary, deceitful warmth, the inevitable chilling of the air as the embers die down. You lie in your bed, a place that is not for rest but for endurance, bundled in the same heavy, smoky layers. The sounds are familiar now, the groan of the wood, the scratching in the walls, the whisper of snow finding its way inside. You have survived one night, and you will survive this one too, but you feel the slow, cumulative toll of it all. A tiredness that sleep cannot cure, a chill that no fire can fully chase away. And as you drift into a shallow, fitful sleep, the cabin itself seems to dissolve around you. The rough log walls become soft. The cold earthen floor fades into a gentle warmth. The oppressive weight of the blankets lifts, replaced by a lightness you had forgotten was possible. The harsh reality of your winter refuge softens at the edges, blurring into the strange, gentle landscape of a dream. You are no longer fighting the cold. You are simply floating in a quiet, peaceful darkness. A place where the wind is silent and the morning is a promise of genuine warmth. Still many months away, but held, tonight, as a perfect, gentle thought in the deepest part of your sleep. The end of the article. Good night.